But we're going to kick it off with Jeff Zimmerman from Arizona, and it's live right there too. Are you in Mesa or where are you in Arizona?
Right outside of Phoenix in a town called Green Creek.
Yeah.
Southeast Valley is where we're at. All right, and Sean, is someone going to keep time so I don't ramble on? Because, yeah, all right, I can't see you on Zoom, so I'm going to introduce Debbie Labelle. Debbie, if you'd come here. Debbie was our general manager. She turned our business around. And you've been doing it about 3 years?
Yes.
3 years. And now she's moved into e-commerce and she's going to turn that business around too, so that we can do some more in that space. We're primarily a local company, but we do sell products, retail, and retail stores pick us up.
Yes.
Around that. And then I want to also introduce another friend of mine, Keith Beltier. So Keith is my boyhood friend, and he farms and he processes seed, and he's from North Dakota. The reason it's important for me to introduce him to you is his family has funded a facility at North Dakota State University that consolidates all of the agricultural activities into one facility. Keith, what's all included in that?
So basically it's the Ag Products Development Complex, and in it is the Northern Crops Institute, which promotes crops in North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota, cereal science at NDSU, the meat science at NDSU, North Dakota Trade Office, and the USDA that also researches the cereal science product use.
All right. That's
all
good.
above.
That's the reason it's exciting to us is Keith helped us as we talked about how we get this thing started. And this will be our 10th harvest this year in June. Some of our original seed, Keith helped me acquire. So we got some from Canada, we got some from North Dakota, we got some from South Dakota. And through his help, we didn't know anything. He helped us get it shipped and get it down here so we could plant it. So Keith, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Debbie, if you stick around, I'm going to have you take us through some of the activities. Sure. And could you check if we're still live there? Is everything going good? Okay. So yep. I will say when I said 10 years, for Heartland Mills, was Thomas Leonard at one time associated with Heartland Mills? You know, okay.
We don't.
I feel like I got my first 50-pound bag of wheat kernels from Heartland, which is in Kansas. Yeah, okay. And then I met Tor. We went to that Pisces Ranch grain gathering, and he's a hoot. Oh, he was so fun to be with. Yeah. I don't know if you remember that, but we went and explored and talked, and it was really a good event. Awesome. So we're standing in our milling facility, and we started, with not knowing anything. We probably know less now, but we really started out not knowing anything, and just got grain, just wheat kernels. And I first had an attachment for the front of my KitchenAid mixer, and that batch of grain came from Anson Mills. And then we got some of that turkey red wheat, and we had moved up to an 8-inch, who makes those?
Not Arco.
No, the 8-inch mill, Meadows 8-inch mill. And then we moved up from the Meadows 8-inch mill to a mill from Austria. That wooden mill. Mm-hmm. It's a hard name to say. Asti roller. And then we sold the Asti roller to a local baker who uses it to this day. I must say the wood mill does wear out. Got to be replacing parts on it. And for a long time we used a larger Meadows mill, which was really great. The quality of that was great. And in fact, I see in Colorado that Kelly Whitaker, that's what he's using at his place in Boulder is a Meadows mill with a Meadows sifter. They're really great. And then I don't have any experience with the New American mill, but you see that all over the place. And by the way, I'm going to show you my mill. Maybe one day I can replace my synthetic stones with real stones made by New American. Well, I'll ask you that offline some other time. So anyway, then we moved up to this facility that we're in now. And it's a good thing and a bad thing. We thought we were going to do more 50-pound bags of flour. We'll get into a little larger scale and do it for a lower cost. So Debbie, I'll follow you around if you want to show everybody the mill here. Sure. And remember, we only have about 10 minutes left.
Yeah,
so
I'll make it quick.
All right.
So basically what I'm going to show you in the mill is the path of the grain. So how the grain moves through the mill and becomes flour. Okay. So it starts here. We kind of built this stand here to hold our 2,000-pound totes of grain. That's the size that we work in, is 2,000 pounds at a time. It loads into this hopper here, goes up through this auger, and the first place it goes is our grain peeler here. What we're doing with this is just peeling off the very outer layer of bran. There's several layers of bran on grain, as you know. We're just peeling off the outer layer because we believe that's really good for human consumption. There's natural chemicals in the bran that protects the wheat from insects and disease and that sort of thing, and we don't think it's really great for human consumption, so we peel that off. And then it goes up into another auger here on the other side that you can't quite see, and then up into this little mini grain elevator, and that takes the grain up into, we can direct it either into silo 1 or silo 2. Each silo holds about 6,000 pounds of grain. And then from the silos, it goes down into another auger, back up, and this is where all the magic happens. This is our stone mill. And inside, this is a circular part of the mill right here. This is where the 2 stones are. So the whole grain gets dropped right down in the center through the 2 stone mills. They get shattered, ground down into flour. And then we have a vacuum auger, take it up, back up to the top here. And then it goes into our sifter. And you can see on the top of the sifter right here, we've got the different screen types depending on what grain we're milling and how fine we want the flour to come out. And then once the flour comes into the sifter portion right here, it goes from most parts of the grain that aren't fit for flour go into this bag here, and this becomes chickpeas. We sell this off to local farmers who want fancy food for their pigs and their chickens. And so the wonderful thing about it is there's no waste. We're using all parts of the grain, either into our flours or into to local farmers to use as feed. So that's it in a nutshell.
Any questions? Anything else you'd like to see or like to know?
Yeah, Jeff, I have a question for you guys. So when you think about the processing of the flour and the sifting from, all of what you're selling, what's the percentage of 100% whole grain versus, sifting, and how far down in extraction or how far up in extraction are you going? Far down, actually, I would like to know in terms of removing bran. Is it like 60% extraction, or where do you go?
I think 80% extraction, I think. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah.
And then we take, depending on the uses for the flour. So like, for example, our pasta flour, we blend the flour with the semolina and make a pasta flour ready to go. That's 100% whole grain, stone ground wheat. But then for other applications, for like bread baking, when you're bread baking, you need a lot more protein. The heritage flours and the stone milled flours don't perform very well in bread. And so what we do is we blend it with a high protein baker's flour that's been highly sifted to help with the performance. But then the heritage grain is there to add the flavor and the nutrients.
And also, Anna, the question about, okay, so we provide our customers what they want. And you know that some of our customers are the top bakers in the country, you know, the James Beard Award winners and all that. I would say that we don't have anybody that asks us for 100% whole wheat flour for bread baking, because it's really difficult to use. There's some methods we're looking at to maybe make whole wheat flour perform better. But right now, we sift off about 15% of the bran and the larger particles. Is that appalling to everybody? Are you upset with me? I mean, I'm just telling you the truth. Nobody wants wheat. All right. And there was a question about how fine do we sift it? Let's see if you can see these. On these screens, that's the size of the screen in microns. And if we were going to make what? A finely sifted flour, we'd use that 195. Let's see, wait, it's the bigger. Yeah, the smaller the number, the finer it is. So this.
He was milling 00 today.
Am I backwards? Yeah. And then if we're doing polenta, something like that, we're up in the big screens up there with the bigger holes. So, but yeah, the sifting part, that's, I know some people are very happy with their small mill and doing 100% whole grain, but and we do 100% whole grain in some of our products that we make, some of our mixes, but generally the baker's flour is a sifted product, even though it's a small amount.
Are those tempering silos? Someone was asking, are those tempering silos?
Oh, tempering. Okay. Did you notice that? You don't want me to say anything, Debbie?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Did you notice that when Debbie came to this piece of equipment here, right there, she didn't even show it. She didn't even mention it, because that's what's called a grain dampener. And we only used it once, and that's when Debbie was running the show. And the guy who was our miller,
we made a sourdough starter, is what we did.
He drenched it with water. And this bucket elevator right here, the inside of it had turned black with mold, and the insides of those silos were black. And I had to disinfect and pressure wash. It took a whole entire day to do that. And so then Debbie was not in favor of tempering. Now there is a way of tempering, and we're going to do it. Now that I'm the boss.
Yeah, now you're in charge, Jeff.
We're going to do it, and I can report back to you how it works, but it should give us a little better yield on our flour. And also it'll bring the moisture up. In the Southwest, the moisture of our grain is 6 to 8%. And the standard moisture is 14%. That's what a baker expects. So we'll see. But whoever asked that question, that was I'm telling you the truth. Oh, I want to show you one more thing here. That's really cool. How are we doing on time?
You have 5 minutes left.
All right. I didn't know this when we bought it from this company is called Partisani. I don't know what this system would cost now that everything's in that class. It wasn't really that much, but I didn't know it came with buttons. All right, I'm a guy, and I thought this is awesome. Look at this. Turn this on. I'll do this one. And now I can punch these buttons. Let's see. What do you think? Oh, what do you think? Isn't that fun?
I think it's pretty hard to hear through the microphone. It sounds not probably what it sounds like in real life through the microphone. Unfortunately, it sounds I think a bit, kind of blocked out or something. So
it reduced the noise, but it's still, you got to see the buttons.
Are there any other questions before we wrap up the tour?
Yeah, just I think Jeff wanted to address a little bit the economics of an artisan mill like his mill, Hayden Flour Mills. Just to kind of wrap our heads around the economics of how these mills are making it through time.
Yeah, well, there gets to be, look, Chris Bianco is one of our customers, and if we were going to sell him a 100% heirloom grain heritage flour, he would be paying at least $100 for a 50-pound bag. Now everybody knows that that's a lot of money. So so that was a real hard thing, because that means the baker's going to use 100% of the heritage and heirloom, which is our specialty. They're going to have a $10, $12 loaf of bread. That's really a high cost. Now the flavor will be great, everything would be great about it, but the marketplace probably, unless you've really developed your marketplace, probably doesn't accept that. And so we saw that, and you can see this if you get Chad Robertson's book, Bread. It's the one with the country loaf on the front. And then he's got a new one out now, which is called Bread. Could that be both called Bread? Anyway, it's his bread books. And I'm reading through that and I go, oh my gosh, here's the secret. He'll put in, let's say it's 1,000 grams of flour. He'll put in 200 grams of a specialty flour, and then the rest of it will be some high quality flour that he uses. All right, so he's doing blending. And the light bulb went off in my head that that's really how a bread baker can make this work. So all through his book, he's blending with rye, he's blending with einkorn, he's blending with white Sonora, he's blending with farro, and it's in a proportion that makes the economics work. So you have to educate your customers that this is generally what we are milling is a craft, not intended to 100% replace their base flour. The second thing is, it doesn't make as much difference for chefs and restaurants when they're using it as an ingredient, say in a fresh pasta, they're hand rolling their own pasta, or they're using it as a grain in a pilaf or a grain salad or a risotto, because they're thinking in terms of cost per serving. And so the cost per serving really doesn't go up that much. And there's research out there that shows that if you use a specialty grain, you call it out on the menu and you call out the name of the source, where it came from, the source, you then can more than double the cost. You can raise the price of the item that more than doubles the cost. Return on the ingredient. So chefs kind of get it, but baking is a little bit hard, especially if you're a baker that makes loaves that don't sell fresh the same day. It worked really good for Don Guerra down in Tucson, because he was doing a subscription-based bread business, and every loaf he made, he sold. It was already pre-sold. So he wasn't bringing it back. But there was another artisan baker down the road here, you know, and he got really big. And he was, he would bring back pretty big load of day-old bread or whatever the time period was. And if you're paying $2-3 a pound for flour, that's a pretty big loss for every loaf of bread.
Someone asked another question,
Yep.
Jeff. They said, do you feel that the only way to be profitable is to export to other states?
No, we're only doing other states. We're really good in Arizona with our semolina. Durum wheat in Arizona is one of our best crops, and so we do sell a lot of that out of state. And don't feel too bad about it because you're not growing it very much in other states. So we don't want to compete with other mills. We do sell retail product in other states, but you know, that's I think that helps us all when people see Red 5 crackers or Emmer pancake mix or purple barley pancake mix. It'd be very easy for a local person to go to the retail store and say, hey, I have the same thing. And we'd be more than happy to support you doing that. We're not looking to be the company that sells everything all over the country. But there was nobody in that space at the time we got in. It was kind of an accident. We won an award from Martha Stewart. Once we won that award, and this is a great marketing principle, if you get someone to endorse you, like if you got, just thinking of all these famous basketball players, but I guess that's a different thing. But Martha Stewart.
LeBron James.
Yeah. LeBron James endorsed you.
Endorsed a basketball maker.
Yeah, never mind. Let's not go there. But anyway, once we got that endorsement or that award from Martha Stewart, we did get a lot of out-of-state retail requests. So you see our product in a lot of spaces, but that certainly could be shared with other people. And we'd be glad to tell you the pains that we went through. Yeah, you know, you can't just make a product and go, okay, I'm going to sell it. Then they say, where's your third-party audit? Where's your non-GMO certification? Where's your, what else did they ask? There's a whole list. Where's your insurance certificate naming us for $2 million?
Yeah.
What's your callback procedure? What's your FSMA plan? And you go, well, I think I'll just sell it to farmers.
Adds to the cost.
Yeah.
Someone else asked, how long do you keep the grain in the silos before milling?
Hardly at all. What would you say? I would say
maybe a couple of hours.
Yeah. Remember, we're not at this point tempering it. If we tempered it, it would be in there anywhere. Durum wheat would be 4 to 6 hours. Hard red spring up to 24 hours.
And someone else asked, what is the mix for your pasta flour, durum, and we use the durum semolina, and then we put finely sifted white Sonora flour into it.
That's for fresh pasta. If the question is about our fresh pasta, yeah, it is a blend. That blend actually came from a pasta making book that I liked very much, and it was 3 parts. So we put in white Sonora. What'd you say again, Debbie?
Type 00 flour.
Type 00 flour, and we put in
Blue Beer durum flour.
Yeah, our durum flour, and it's got a lot of flavor. Yeah. But for our dried pasta, it's 100% durum semolina. Very high quality durum semolina, because that's the product that we have here in Arizona.
Okay, so
I think, thank you so much. I think we need to move on. Thanks, Jeff, for making the time and showing your setup there and explaining a few things around milling and all of the pathways that you've managed for over these years. So thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see each other soon again.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, everybody on the East Coast. Again, I'm Dan Hobbs with the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union Cooperative Development Center. total honor and pleasure to be here with Mark Nightingale again. I think it was 2 years ago that we had him at Grain School. Gosh, maybe even 3. Not an easy guy to pin down. He's very busy, but we got him. So I want to just say a couple of things by way of introduction. 2 sessions ago, we talked about seed being consolidated faster than any other natural resource in the history of the United States. And I want to say grain really has been commodified like virtually no other agricultural resource. Some of you probably saw that the wheat markets are soaring with the news of Ukraine and Russia. Those 2 countries produce, I think, 1/4 of the world's supplies of wheat. And so that just gives you a sense of how this is big business. It's global, it's big, it's commodity. A very important thing happened in 1922. And so we're actually at the 100th anniversary of what we call the Capper-Volstead Act. This is also in cooperative circles known as the Magna Carta of cooperatives. Prior to this act of legislation, farmers were actually being prosecuted when they tried to band together to form associations, form cooperatives, and market their agricultural products together. So 100 years ago was officially the time when farmers could form associations and begin to market together, and it opened up a whole new era in rural America. And so for our organization, the Farmers Union, that works with cooperatives year in and year out for well over 100 years, this was kind of the beginning of a very economically important era in rural America. And so Heartland Mills is a great example of farmers working together. And so Mark, I'm going to ask you to unmute your microphone there. And you are in the heartland. You are in the middle of traditional wheat country, mostly dryland wheat country. And I'm going to ask you just maybe 3 or 4 questions. And I hope we can start with just a description of where you're located and how Heartland Mill is structured.
Thank you, Dan. It's great to be here and good to see all of you again. Actually, I want to make just a little bit of a correction. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
We can hear you, Mark.
Okay, very good. We technically are not a cooperative. We are a Kansas C corporation. That's a closed corporation. And the reason we did that back in 1985, actually we started a little over 37 years ago in that process. At that time, there was the one type of a cooperative, and that was the traditional double circle cooperative. And that's 1 member, 1 vote. Where we run into problems when we started selling stock for our company, we had some people that shook the piggy bank and put a little money in, and we had some people that put a lot of money in. So you can see the problem when we have an official stockholder meeting, we have 1 member, 1 vote. So the way we overcame that by unanimous vote was that we would go with a C corporation. And that's where we have stayed. That's been challenged 1 time. And after a couple of rounds of discussion, the stockholders again unanimously chose the C corporation. At that time, there was just that 1 type of cooperatives at that time. So I know there are different types of cooperatives today. So I would say, if you're interested in a cooperative, you need to look at those real hard to see what options you have and to try to overcome that 1 member, 1 vote, if that is an obstacle to anyone.
So Mark, can you clarify then, so your ownership structure though does involve farmers, does it not?
It sure does. We are owned by the farmers. Now, actually, some of them have deceased, but their sons or their family are running the farm. So we've just accepted them voting in proxy of that, which we can do.
How many folks do you have in the ownership structure now?
We have 63 stockholders.
Uh-huh. And do they all have delivery obligations that comes with their ownership, or how does that work?
They have no obligations at all. They own the stock. And that is part of the issue that has to be discussed and overcome. When I look back on that, there's so much to be learned from that whole process. You have some people that, like I said, shook the piggy bank. And what happens is that outside buyers come in and want to buy that certified organic wheat, and they give them a good price, and they don't even call us and ask us what we're bidding on that wheat. That grain or wheat goes to that buyer. That's how it's done. There's really no penalty for that in our structure. Another one is, if I was doing that again, I would insist that we would raise the price per share at a higher level than what we started out at and what we had, because it's so easy then for anyone to default or to still remain a stockholder in your company. That's part of the doldrums of what there is out there. So I'm just being honest with you and explaining it. I have visited with other mills who are very similar to like we are, and they have encountered exactly the same thing.
And so are there non-farmer stockholders as well?
There are there are some that have retired and rented out their farm. So technically they are not farming, but at the time they bought the stock, they were.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's really a farmer-owned company. And then how about your employees? How does that work? Can they have a share in the company, or what sort of benefits do they have?
We haven't done that. We've asked a few of them that really show initiative if they want to do that. Most of them are happy right where they are. So we haven't offered that, but if there would be a pressure to do that, I'm quite certain our board would offer that. Now we have about 4, 5, 6 of our 32 employees that are shareholders.
Yeah, interesting. So now we want to go back to your location here for a quick second.
Sure.
If you could just place us geographically, where are you located? And you're a different kind of animal, I think, out there being certified organic, are you not?
Yeah, we are. We are in western Kansas, about 60 miles from the Colorado Kansas border. From north to south, we're right in the center of the state. So we're along Highway 96. And if you guys are in Colorado, you will know Highway 96 goes into Colorado and comes out just east of Pueblo. That's where it comes there and meets Highway 50 east of Pueblo. So that's where we are. We're the second county east. We're the first county that's in central time zone. The county west of us is Greeley County technically, and it is in the mountain time zone.
And so what makes that good wheat producing country?
Well, we have real deep, heavy topsoil. Okay. We have topsoil from 2.5 to 3.5 feet. And that makes a very, very good wheat growing. The wheat, it's a deep rooted plant, and the taller the wheat, the deeper the root zone is. So the root zone is genetically proportionate to the plant height. So, that's one thing that really made our country here, when those tall wheats in the heirloom wheat days, when that was king, they were very drouthy, very drouthy. And the elevation helps for making protein. So we can have proteins all the way from, I'm going to say on a poor year, about 10.5, and on a good year, we'll go up to over 15% protein with test weights from 61 to 64 pounds.
Nice. Now, when you got started and you went to some of these farmers, presumably asking them whether they wanted to grow wheat organically, what kind of responses did you get?
Oh, they thought we were stupid, absolutely stupid, because their father had done that and failed and practically lost the farm. And we took time to explain to them that that was organic by neglect. We simply didn't know any better. So I don't know if it was willfully neglectful. We just didn't know. So it was organic really by ignorance. And today we're using crop rotations. We are using different types of cover crops. And with that, we have not really, I'm going to say per se, had a failure due to the organic practices. We've had some crop failures due to a late frost when the wheat was in or setting the kernels. We've had loss due to drought, and we've had loss due to hail.
So are you playing some kind of agronomic role with your producers? Do you advise them on these crop rotations? And I mean, how do people get going in this direction?
There are plenty of people out there that are selling crop, what I call soil nutrition programs. I don't like to use the word so much as soil fertilizers, but technically it would be. But they actually have and do the soil tests, and they provide agronomic information on what type of crops to plant, what types of products to put on, and the growers become very knowledgeable in from 3 to 5 years. They attend those during these months right now. There, those training sessions that are across the high plains.
Yeah, and since I imagine a lot of this wheat is produced in dryland conditions, how's the crop looking this year by and large? Have you had some moisture?
By and large, it's good, Dan. It really is. Mm-hmm.
And these, so mostly you're working with winter wheats, also spring wheats?
No spring wheats. We're working with winter wheats and durum wheats as well.
Okay. Yeah. Now I'd like to shift into varieties a little bit. I know you talked a little bit about turkey red wheat, and I wonder how do these heritage wheats perform for these farmers you're working with? And can you say a little bit about the market for them? Do they occupy a significant part of your portfolio there?
It's about 2% of our volume. The heirloom is. The heirlooms, they have a good average in terms of their reliability from, I'm going to say, from 25 to 35 bushels to the acre. A bushel is 60 pounds. Okay. So that's kind of where the range of yield is. You go into the newer varieties, you go all the way from 75 to 90 bushels on the maximum. And that's the difference. So there is, you've got to pay those growers an acceptable rate of return on those heirloom wheats. Otherwise, they won't plant them.
Uh-huh. And what kind of price difference are we talking there?
We're talking double the organic price for sure.
Uh-huh. Yep. And so what are the heirlooms that you're working with? Turkey red, others?
And red 5. Turkey red and red 5.
Okay. And so was Fife traditionally produced in Kansas or mostly turkey red?
Turkey red was. It was brought over in 1874. And the red 5 was brought into Canada originally, and then it kind of moved down into Minnesota and the northern tier of states, because actually the red 5 here can go either way. We can plant it for a spring wheat or a winter wheat here.
Interesting. Yeah, no, turkey red, I would say, along with Sonora, and it seems like those two have been really the vanguards of this, heritage wheat movement. Could you tell us a little bit about the history of the turkey?
Yeah, the turkey was brought over in 1874. Bernard Warkentine was the big guy here in Kansas that made that happen. And actually, the 1 year he brought in about over 10,000 bushels of wheat, and that was planted all to seed. And the United States at that time, the wheat growing areas, they did not know about the hard red winter wheats. And when these immigrants, farmers started planting their wheat, they were told that you do not know how these winters will be, and your wheat will freeze out. Well, it did. It did freeze out. It went down and turned brown, and everybody thought it was over. But these immigrants remained silent, and guess what? In the spring, it regrew, and there was the birth of the winter wheats. Well, all the millers in the area, they decided, well, we're not going to mill it. But one of the miller's wives went to the mill and asked for the immigrant flour, and she took several bags home, and she gave it to people in the community, and the rest was history. The performance on those winter wheats over the conventional spring wheats at that time changed the whole direction and where wheat was raised. It used to be raised on the East Coast. Now it switched it to the western half of the United States.
Who were the people that brought over the turkey red?
The Mennonite people were the immigrant people.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And then how about some of the, do you have some heirlooms in other crop families, corn or barley, rye?
I started out working with that, and I touched on that in my presentation a number of years ago. And I had some heirloom durums. I had some heirloom barleys and heirloom ryes. But, they shut me down on that because the business was growing and they wanted me to be in the office managing the company instead of out there in the fields, roguing and checking plants. So I laid it down. It was a tough day for me.
Yeah. Maybe you'll get back there sometime.
Yeah, maybe I will.
And so on some of these more modern and improved varieties, do you maintain relationships with some of the research stations, or how do you decide?
I do. Yes. And I have some plant breeders that are still alive that have conventional ways of breeding wheat and doing the field crosses, and how they cross the wheat back into agropyrans and agrotriticans. I did some of that work myself, because when you start crossing wheats for yield, you start losing a genetic package of disease resistance. So where do you get that disease resistance? You get that disease resistance by crossing those wheats back again, one generation back into an intermediate wheatgrass like agropyrans or agrotriticans. And that's where they picked up their genetics. Well, now what has happened in modern plant breeding, they say we forget the genetic package. We're going to depend on the aerial pilots to spray on the poison to kill the bugs and the disease on the plants. We're not going to breed it in to the plants any longer. So they are no longer crossing back into the agropyrans and the agrotriticans.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, we're probably starting to run out of time here, but right. Before we sign off, what are you excited about? I mean, well, maybe a two-part question. What's on the horizon for Heartland that you're excited about? And really, what are your leading products and where are they going?
Well, I'm excited about seeing the growth of the overall organic industry and the natural foods industry. I really am excited about grain school at UCC there in Colorado Springs. I really think that it has been so needed. Is a grassroots operation doing the research of what you people are showing me that's being done. I'm very proud of it. I think about it a lot, and that really, excites me. Some of the concerns that I see for the heirloom wheats, I don't know if we have the time for this, but lodging is an extreme problem, because lodging lays down, and like the wheat lays down, and when it lays down, we get monsoons or we get wet seasons. And when that wheat lays on the soil from 2 to 4 weeks maximum before it dries out, it can pick up soil-borne diseases and like aflatoxin and different things, vomitoxin, and you can name it. And we're going in now, being required to test for the mycotoxins on all these grains that are going into our mills. And lodging is a big one. The straw strength is a big one. And we know these heirloom wheats are weak in straw strength. That's why the dwarf wheats came in back in the 1960s, late 1960s. But again, like I said, the root structure is genetically proportionate to the plant height. Remember, that's a rule of thumb. So the taller the wheat, the deeper the root zone is, and the more your wheat will go down and get that moisture and get those nutrients out of the soil.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I guess lastly here, before we sign off, with this situation in Ukraine and Russia, is that going to have any impact on Heartland?
Emotionally, it does, because personally, I have relatives over there. And we haven't heard from them, but we think about them. And yeah, my grandfather immigrated here at 1900 as a 19-year-old lad, and he escaped Vladimir. Can't think of his name right now, but the guy who started communism down there. Anyway, he escaped out of that, and it was his third try getting out of the country, and he did. And he was able to come to the United States. So I could tell you that story someday, but we're out of time, I think.
Man, okay. Well, we'll be thinking about you and your family. And Mark, it's really good to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, all of you at Grain School.
Tonight we have Miller Greg Russo with us, and organic farmer Tor Oechsner. I'm going to say it in German style, but there's a second Miller, and that's Neil Johnston, and they are working together on farmer ground flour, an organization and a company from the Finger Lakes region in upstate New York. So I think that Tor will have the floor here now, and he might show some images also.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nana. This is really cool to be part of the grain school and be sitting here in New York and talking to all of you out in Colorado. So as she said, the Farmer Ground Flour is, I guess, a cooperative where I'm the farm component of it, the supply side of it, and my partners Greg and Neil run the flour mill. So Nana wanted me to talk a little bit about the farm side of it, and I'll talk about sort of the mentality of getting into flour milling, and then Greg will talk more about, you know, the actual flour mill and what we're doing there, markets and whatnot. So I'm gonna attempt to share the screen here and do a little PowerPoint. Let's see. Here we go. All right. So that's a little Glen hard red spring wheat there. So here's just a little bit about my farm. We got established in 1993. I started out in conventional dairy farming and then didn't work out with that, and then became a VW Audi mechanic, and then started this farm sort of on the side doing vegetables, and then decided I really wanted to take it to the next level, and kept building the farm up and started producing grain and renting land. And since 2003, my family's been 100% farm income. And right now we're doing about 1,200 acres. Most of it's rented. We started from scratch and couldn't afford both the equipment and the land. And we're certified organic as well. So here's a little map of New York for you, all you out west. If you don't know where New York is or what's going on in New York, we're sort of in the south center of the state, right outside of Ithaca, where Cornell University, that's our ag school. And you can see way down at the bottom is New York City, which is a really important market for us. You'll also see that although New York shares the name of New York City, New York really is almost completely rural and heavy into agriculture, mostly dairy. There's a little aerial view of my farm, and you can see the landscape there, quite different from Kansas. We've got a lot of woods and rolling hills, but you know, it's a little bit of a tough go right where I am for farming. You know, most of the soils we've got are HEL. For people that don't know what HEL is, that's highly erodible land. So we've got a lot of slopey fields. We do a lot of strip cropping, as you can see here. The other thing we've got as a huge negative is the extra large soil particles, otherwise known as rocks. It's really rocky, tough farming. I spend a lot of time on my skid steer. If there was an Olympic stone picking competition, I would enter as the United States representative and could probably place at least third. And we get these extra large particles. So this is probably anathema to the beautiful soils Mark was describing out in Kansas. So, you know, the row cropping for organic, because we're cultivating, you can see here we've got a lot of these stones, and it makes it very difficult to do a really nice job and good weed control on row crops. So because of the steep slopes and the stony soils, we sort of started focusing on small grains sort of as a necessity. And it turned out to be a smart choice, I think. And you can see that this is Glen hard red spring wheat. We can actually grow pretty decent wheat. I mean, we can't grow the kind of wheat that you can grow out in Kansas, obviously, but upstate New York was in the early part of the, as Mark alluded to, we were the breadbasket of the nation at one point until it moved out to better growing areas. And there's some real challenges with growing wheat in New York. We've got high humidity, so falling numbers can be a problem. Fusarium head blight is a huge problem. So, harvest is really tricky. The other problem we have is low protein because of the high moisture. So we're really, in our farming operation, it's taken me a long time to figure out what varieties and then how to kind of trick the plant into producing a lot of protein when it's very humid and, the dry conditions sort of bring on protein in wheat because it isn't really been bred to grow in these sort of conditions. So these are the main cash crops on our farm. We grow a variety called Harris, soft white winter wheat. Our hard red winter wheat is Warthog, and our hard red spring wheat is Glen. And all these varieties, they're not heirloom varieties. Harris is pretty old. It's an old New York variety. It's a tall straw variety. But they all do quite well in our tough conditions. And we grow a rye from Poland called Danko, which also does really, really well for us. So I'll talk a little bit about farmer ground flour. I'm 1/3 owner of the flour mill. I'm also the part owner of a bakery, Wide Awake Bakery, which we won't get into here, but that sort of bakery came out of doing flour testing for us. And the bakery also acts as a test bed for our flours, and also as kind of a tech service for bakeries when they start using our flour, because they don't always bake as these bakers in the city are used to. So why do we get into flour milling? Here's Greg. This is our very first mill. It's a 24-inch Meadows knockoff. It isn't actually a Meadows, but we got this from some bakery in Pennsylvania. And I kind of got to know Greg. He was a Cornell student, and he was doing a little project, farm management project, on my farm, and we got to be friends. And when he graduated, me and another farmer had gotten this idea to mill some flour, and I kind of conned Greg into, I don't know if he's glad I did or not, but he kind of came on at the beginning and really, I wouldn't have had the mill going without him. And the way I kind of got to doing this is as a teenager, I worked in a slaughterhouse. I grew up right outside of the city. And this guy was a farmer who couldn't make it, and he decided to put up this little slaughterhouse, and he was, adding value to his livestock by slaughtering them and selling them to customers around New York City. It's a very ethnic area, and people really wanted this thing. So, I didn't realize how much this was going to change the way I did things, but this was a really important lesson to me that John D. Maria taught me to, think outside the box a little bit as a farmer. And as we all know, any of you farmers out there, farming is this really ridiculous backwards business model where we buy everything retail and sell everything wholesale. And if anybody's been to business school, the one way to go out of business is to follow this business model. So I got into doing a little processing on the farm, cleaning seed and doing things like that to add a little value to my grain. The other thing that kind of spurred me into the next step of the flour mill was my grandfather was a German immigrant and a master baker from Würzburg, Germany. And when I was a little kid, I ran around in his bake shop covered in flour. And for some reason, I hadn't made the connection between what I was growing and the flour that my grandfather used to make bread. But when that light bulb went off, I thought, hey, well, why don't I add a little more value to this and start grinding it into flour? And I was so completely ignorant about how complex and nuanced flour milling was. I thought I could just set up a grinding machine in the corner of my barn and I would throw wheat in there and grind it, and out would come the flour. And it ends up, as all of you know, to be this very nuanced, very complex process. And farmer ground flour sort of came out of that whole idea. And when we started it, it was kind of lucky for us. This was sort of, at least in the New York City area in the Northeast, it was, you know, the locavore movement was going, and I didn't really know much about any of that. But this was sort of the missing link. Down in New York City, there's this gigantic green market system. It's the largest in the United States, where all the farmers around the city have all these markets set up all over the place. And the one thing they lacked was local flour. And when they heard what we were doing, they sort of put their arms around us and really pushed us and got us into these markets. And they set up a taste testing with all these varieties of wheat to figure out what we were going to grow and what was going to be acceptable at the French Culinary Institute in New York City. And we ground up all these different varieties, sent them out to all these bakers in New York City. We had food writers and restaurateurs, and all these people came, and we made scorecards, and we figured out which of these varieties are really going to be acceptable to the bakers as a first step. And then when we figured that out, I took them back to the farm and figured out how we were going to make these work in New York State to grow them, because there was a lot of pessimism that only good wheat can be grown out in the West, and New York wheat is shit and all this stuff. And we had a lot of pushback. And Green Market really pushed these bakers to use our product and get it in there. And so we started actually milling in 2009, decided to go with stones and do freshly milled flour, and, you know, got these flavors of these tested varieties. And, you know, I think what is kind of unique about farmer ground flour is the fact that I, as a farmer, have a stake in the flour mill. It's not a cooperative like Mark has there, but it's actually owned by a farmer, and the farmer is growing. And my other job, besides growing for the mill, is to work with, we have about 10 other farmers that grow for the mill. That it's sort of my job to be the liaison with them and get seed together and give them agronomic help to, you know, to make sure we've got enough supply to fill all our orders. This is sort of a slide of the product flow. You can see from Oshner Farms, product flows to farmer ground, to the bakery, to our CSA. And, you know, farmer ground sells outside of New York City, all over the state, and all over the Northeast. Whole Foods buys our flour, and Park Slope Co-op and Wegmans, which is a good big supermarket chain. The majority of our sales are to bakeries. Greg will talk about this. And Regional Access moves a lot of our stuff into the New York City area. And my farm's role also is to take the wheat that doesn't make milling spec and to process that and sell it to distilleries and malt houses and things like that, that maybe want low protein wheat, or a distillery that can take low falling number wheat. So what we try to do with our farmers on contract is to, you know, have them grow for the mill market. If it doesn't work out that we can't buy it for the mill, we try really hard to market their grain for about the same prices we could have paid them for the good grain to other markets, the distillery markets or whatever they are. And so, you know, my job is sort of also to take that flow of non-spec wheat and do something with it, so the farmers are always getting a higher price than they could get otherwise. So here's a little picture of the bakery just quickly, and Stefan making bread. We're not going to get into that. And I think I could stop there and let Greg talk about the mill, because that's probably more in tune with what this is all about here. So I'm gonna stop my share here and let Greg take it.
Thank you, Tor. That was great.
Okay, how's it going, everyone? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, give me a second. First time screen share. Can you see my slideshow?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. This has been educational for me so far. I even learned some from Tor's presentation. Tor, was that you in the slaughterhouse picture?
It was, yes, yep.
So we started in 2009, and I was working part-time for Tor. I actually put a lot of miles on that rock picker in his picture. And we started with Tor bringing grain to us at the mill in 50-pound bags. And I would scoop it into the mill in buckets by hand, and then I would scoop it into, you can see a little beam scale there, I would scoop it into bags by hand. So pretty humble beginnings. And then eventually the business grew enough that we could justify buying some land, and we had the Amish put up a pole barn for us. And Tor was still bringing grain to us in 2,000-pound tote sacks, and we were running the bran into a gravity wagon there. So eventually we, you can see we put up some used bins. We built a cleaning system, installed a lot of the stuff ourselves, and just slowly, piece by piece, started putting it together. And then this is a current picture of the mill taken last year. We put on an office edition. We finally got a septic system and a flush toilet for the first time in 12 years. And got a large mixing bin, the biggest bin you can see there in the foreground. We used to have it at Tor's, or a version of it at Tor's, and that creates our wheat blend, so we can buy in wheat from a bunch of different farmers and get a consistent mix. So this is inside that blending bin. Like Tor was saying, here in the Northeast, we have a lot of quality issues, a lot of variation in wheat quality. So this is pretty instrumental for us to provide a consistent product to our customers. The way it works is those down augers are, constantly running, but also that whole mechanism is rotating around the what's that? Oh, sorry. That whole mechanism is rotating around the circumference of the bin, and those augers are also moving back and forth along the radius of the bin. It holds about 7,000 bushels. And, this way we're not just blending one truckload with another, we're also blending each truckload within itself. And, here in New York, even within one truck from one farmer, you will get significant variation, maybe in falling number or in protein if they're harvesting from multiple fields. So it's a pretty useful tool for us. So now inside the mill, our milling system consists of a 30-inch Meadows mill. And this is a picture of it right here. So it goes through this Meadows mill, up through a sifter, and then the overs from the sifter actually go down to a New American stone mill to get finished off. So it's, it's a very abbreviated version of the gradual reduction system. And for us, that's also, it just provides more consistency in the grind. My experience is that when you try to do the reduction on one mill, it's harder to get a consistent texture. So the process is basically mill, sift, mill, and sift. And even for the whole grain flours, we're sending it through both mills. Here's a few details on the Meadows, just sort of interesting little modifications we've made. You know, temperature is always, in my experience, it's kind of a myth that stone mills will mill at a lower temperature. So we cut a hole in the outlet spout so we could shoot the temperature coming off the stones with an infrared gun. And we try to keep it under 135 degrees. But that's, you know, directly coming off the stones. And that's only a fraction of the flour is coming off at that temperature, but that seems to maintain good quality. And with the meadows, you know, getting accurate settings from day to day can be a challenge. So one of our guys rigged up a laser, and we put marks on the adjusting handles. So that way, every time we go back and readjust it, we know we're getting a very accurate replication of the settings the day before. And that also helps us as the stones wear over time. It helps us track how much the stones are wearing, so we know when it's time to get ready to dress them again. So this is upstairs. This is just one of the sifters, just to give you an idea. Our operation, a lot of plywood, a lot of grease on the plywood, a lot of things cobbed together from used equipment. But this is a centrifugal sifter. We're kind of moving towards those as opposed to the box style sifter, just because it reduces vibration. The box sifter we have kind of shakes our whole second floor. We have a steel mezzanine, and even though it's all braced up, it still shakes the whole thing. So we're moving towards these just for convenience. So this is back downstairs to the New American stone mill. This is the second step in the process. And so what's flowing into this mill is actually, you'd call it bran and mids, or some combination of already reduced product. So we've only been using them for a year and a half, but in my experience, they wear much more evenly than the meadows. If you can imagine the grain going into the stones on the meadows, the grain is going to immediately drop down, and so you're going to get more wear on the bottom of the stones. And obviously, we had to retrofit where the inlet where the grain goes in to take the mids we're sending in there. We have a little scraper. It's coming out of a sifter, so there's a decent amount of dust. So we have a little scraper on the inlet to keep it from clogging up. But so far we've had really good experience. We've only had to dress it every 4 to 6 months, which for us is something somewhere around 500,000 pounds of material is going through this thing. And we have to do less work aligning the stones from dressing to dressing. We built we call it the dressing room, especially for sharpening the stones. And it just makes it a million times easier to have a dedicated space with a chain hoist where you can really, we used to sharpen the stones in the production room right where they were. We would just take the stone off and go to work. But in my experience, getting the stones really well aligned when you're using natural stones is a big part of the challenge. So this has kind of stepped up our game as far as what we can quality control for the stone milling. This is just one little piece of our cleaning system, which here in New York State, again, comes in very useful. This is our gravity table. And so we have all kinds of issues with, for example, wild radish, which is a weed in spring wheat. The seeds are very similar size and shape to wheat kernels, so we need to separate by density to clean them out. It'll help clean up vomitoxin issues, which are, every 3 to 4 years we seem to have at least some to deal with. And we've gotten pretty lucky on falling number, but this last year was kind of a doozy. So we're running, maybe a third to a half of the local hard wheat over this thing. And I've been pretty amazed how much it can improve the falling number. We've taken wheat from as low as 150 all the way up to 300 or 350. So it's paid for itself many times over. just a quick view of our warehouse. We try to keep things not more than 3 or 4 weeks. We sort of have a production cycle. We cycle through all the different products we do, which is, we're milling spelt, rye, einkorn, hard wheat, soft wheat. So once you make all purpose and combine all the wheats in different ways, we end up with, 10 or 12 different products to be milling. It's a photo of our lab. So this was part of the addition we put on in 2020. And, we used to have all this equipment in boxes, basically in the office space. And when we wanted to do a test, we'd have to pull something out. So it's been really nice to finally have the space to do what we need to do. There's the blue machine to the left is a falling number tester from China, which is maybe a tenth of the cost of the European or American made machines. And then the little gray machine on the right is actually a starch damage tester, which for stone milling, we have found to be pretty useful actually for tracking how often, we need to sharpen the stones and really dialing in what the optimum water absorption for bakers is. Obviously with more starch damage, you're going to get more water absorption, particularly with really hard wheats. One of the things that we didn't know early on, and I learned, is that here in New York, we actually grow really, really hard, pretty high quality spring wheat. And I think that was one of the issues we had with bakers early on was we had more starch damage than we were anticipating. So this is the production room, kind of many steps back from the mill, and this is just the crew doing 2-pound bags. We are in the process of making a dedicated space to do those 2-pound bags, because you can see it's kind of right there in the middle of the production area where we should probably put another new American mill. And right now there's really not much buffer between that machine they're bagging out of in the mill, so they have to be bagging the product that we're milling at that very second, which is sort of logistically difficult. So that's my presentation. Here's a couple more things. This is a painting done by that woman in the last photo who was bagging flowers. She went to graduate school for art, so kind of brightens up our facility. And this is not the whole crew, but this is most of the crew here on the right. And we have a really, really great team, pretty versatile crew, folks that can do a little bit of everything. So that's me and Neil's business partner. Kneeling down to the left there is Neil Johnston. And it's been a great 12 years. I'm hoping for another, good 12 years in the future. So thanks for listening, and be happy to answer any questions.
Well, that was terrific. Thank you very much for both of you for introducing your company and your business model and all of the work that you do. I think in the interest of time, I would suggest, and we've heard so much about New American Stone Mill, it probably makes sense to get Andrew Hain to present and then open it up for questions, since there's a lot of overlap probably in terms of the questions. Andrew, are you ready to jump in? And this is Andrew with New American Stone Mill from Vermont. Thank you for joining us. Yeah.
Thanks, Nana. And thanks for having me, inviting me to participate in this. I basically have just a PowerPoint presentation, and so let me see if I can pull that up for you here. Let's show the first screen there.
Yes.
Okay. So we came to milling a little bit different than everybody else did. My wife and I started this. We bought this bakery in 2004. So we were both chefs, and we're looking to do something a little different, and buying bread from this little hobby bakery called Elmore Mountain Bread. And the baker came in one day and he said, "Hey, does anybody, want to buy a house and 10 acres and a wood-fired bakery?" And I thought it was interesting, so we went up and checked it out. And thought it was pretty intriguing. So we agreed to buy the bakery. And he said, okay, we have about 3 weeks to learn how to fire the wood-fired oven and mix and shape and use QuickBooks and all that. So we jumped right in and started to bake in this Alan Scott style wood-fired oven, which is a very difficult oven to learn to bake bread in. They're very temperamental. And in order to figure it out, we reached out to as many wood-fired bakeries that we could find. There was a Yahoo group originally, and the Bread Bakers Guild of America had a lot of resources. And gradually over time, we got to meet and know a lot of wood-fired bakeries and learned how to use this thing and become better bakers. And also learned that these ovens had a lot to improve on, and I had a lot of ideas how to fix it. Well, eventually, this oven started to fall apart, and so we had to do something different. So we worked with a mason and implemented a bunch of those ideas to build a Turtle Rock masonry heat oven. This is a 3-door directly fired wood-fired oven. And we use a mechanical loader to bake bread. And kind of working to design and improve on this oven was my first step into fabrication and design work. Well, after this oven was built, we got to learn it pretty well, and a lot of our baker friends started to come around and say, hey, could we get one of those ovens too? And so he ended up building probably about 20 of those ovens all over the US. And then shortly after that, I guess it was we were baking out of that oven for about 5 years. And in 2014, one of those good friends was Dave Bauer, who had Farm and Sparrow Bakery in North Carolina. He had the same Turtle Rock oven, and he had been using a Osti roller mill to mill local grains. So I called him up and I said, hey, I'd really like to get into milling. What size Osti roller should I buy? He said, well, there's some problems with it, and this is what I would improve. And I've really been looking for somebody who could build their own stone mill using natural granite stones instead of the synthetic stones that Osterroller uses. So he said, here, let me do something. And he milled a bunch of his local grain and overnighted it to us. And we opened this box of flours, and we're just blown away because we had used organic white roller milled flour all along, but had never experienced the flavors and the aromas from all of these varieties of fresh stone ground flours. And at that point, we knew that this is what we wanted to use in our bread, and that we couldn't go back because, after all, we were making hand-shaped, naturally leavened bread baked in a wood-fired oven. So why not try to mill it ourselves as well? So I worked with some friends who, one was an engineer and a welder, and talked to, looked at all the other mill designs, and researched in a bunch of old books that I got from the Society for the Preservation of Old Mills. We purchased some of these pink granite millstones from Meadows, and put our first mill together and started milling. You can see that original mill in the back, and then we bought a sifter there from Meadows Mill as well. So we had been baking our bread for 10 years at this point, and we didn't want to totally change everything on our customers, but we wanted to improve. We really wanted to use that fresh milled flour. Initially, we started adding a little bit at a time, kind of trying to tweak our recipes from we used to use 80% white flour and 20% whole wheat, or 95% white flour and 5% whole wheat, depending on our breads. So when we switched to fresh milling, we milled it, sifted it, and then we blended it back together to try to recreate those similar textures. But because it was fresh milled, it was naturally different. And our customers started to say stuff. They would say, hey, your bread is always, it's really, really good, but it's different. It tastes more wheaty. And that was like the best compliment they could have given us, because that's exactly what we were going for. Well, after we got that going, the bread was turning out really nicely. There's, you can see the crumb color is a little bit darker in this loaf from using the stone ground flour. And this is many of our reasons why we switched to doing it. We wanted to have the best flavor we could. We wanted to get a lot more nutrition in there from using the fresh stone ground flour, and then maintain the tradition of wood-fired baking and long fermentations. Stone milling is a practice worth reviving. And historically, mills were a key part of community food production and now are vital to the renewal of strong local food systems. Well, when we started milling, we thought, okay, we'll just find some wheat. Well, we talked to this guy. This is Jack Glazer. He was one of the few farmers growing wheat in Vermont at the time. And it was a bad year in 2014. He didn't have anything available for us. And so we had to source from larger mills. We actually reached out to Heartland Mills, and they were able to ship us clean grain that was spec'd and was actually a really good way to start milling, because we had a nice, clean, consistent product that we knew what we were getting. But ultimately, our goal was to bake with Vermont grown wheat. That led us to meet this couple. This is the Rogers family. A friend of ours is at the farmer's market, and he said, hey, I know this couple, and they planted a bunch of Redeemer wheat, and you should talk to them. So we called them up, and we said, hey, we've got this bakery and a mill, and we're looking for wheat. And they said, well, that's great, because we grew all this wheat, but we don't know what we're going to do with it. So we got together, and after it was harvested, we had it tested by the University of Vermont Grain Extension Service. And we even got to drive the combine with them at one point, which was a real treat for a baker to see. That's my wife, Blair, there. And the wheat tested fine. We milled it up, and instead of blending it in with everything, we wanted to really give it its, recognize it for what it was. And so we created this Redeemer bread from the Redeemer wheat. And it's a very appropriate name, I think, because we were sort of redeeming this tradition of locally grown wheat, milled and baked and fed to our community. Because of our success with them for the first couple of years, we started to work with other farmers in the area. This is Morningstar Farm up in Glover. He was growing mostly feed and dry beans, and had tried to grow some wheat, but he planted spring wheat called Bowls, and he had real small kernel size and was having trouble using it or selling it. So we agreed to buy it and mill it, and we were able to blend it in with what we were using. So he had an outlet for the grain, and we were able to start a relationship, and now he's one of our main growers now. He's had several successful years. This is Tom and David Kenyon. They are the biggest wheat growers in Vermont. They had planted about 140 acres of winter wheat last year. And then another farm we work with is Sean Jang. He has NEK grains, and they were a dairy farm, and that his grandparents started. And he came back to the farm and started to grow barley and wheat. And they also were trying to figure out an outlet for their wheat. And so as they transitioned from conventional to organic, we started to mill this for them and give the flour, sell the flour back to them, and then they're able to kind of start their business and have an outlet for the flour. And that's really a important example of what we've been trying to do here in Vermont, is to sort of help these small farms, especially dairy farms, have some other options of what they can grow. Dairy farming has been very difficult in Vermont for the last decade. And in doing so, a big part of this is keeping the working landscape, the agricultural landscape going in Vermont. So this is eventually what brought us to our goal with the bakery, is that we've been able to mill all of our wheat and source it all 100% from Vermont. And even though we're a pretty small bakery, we have bought, we are buying about 50 to 60 tons of organic wheat from all those farmers. And it's become kind of a model, I believe, of, what's possible in a small state like in Vermont to develop this sort of regional grain economy. And that's important because that means all of those agricultural products are keeping that money in Vermont. It created a lot of resiliency in our food system in that in the early days of the pandemic, when there was no flour on the shelves, we had tons and tons of wheat that were easily able to mill up and start bagging and sell directly to consumers and businesses and stores pretty quickly. So that's Elmer Mountain Bread's story. But what eventually happened is that community of bakers started to come back around as we were milling this and asking, hey, we'd be interested in getting a mill from you. Would you ever consider building one for us? This is Jonathan Bethany. He has Selu Bakery in Washington, D.C. He's one of the best whole grain bakers that I know. And so I decided to go for it. So I started a company called New American Stone Mills to create and offer this fresh stone ground flour to other bakers. First thing I had to do was find granite. Fortunately, about 45 minutes from our bakery is this quarry where they quarry very gray granite, which is a nice, hard, even structured gray granite. We took a hike up to it to look over it. We found one of the local stone sheds here that figured out how to cut the stones into discs for us and the hole in the notch. Eventually, I taught myself how to cut the stones myself. That's a 48-inch runners or bedstone right there. And some of the first mills that we built, originally they were quite utilitarian because I just wanted to present an affordable option for bakers to mill their own flour, because really it's, the mill is the tool that farmers and bakers need to connect and to be able to produce their flour and to use it on smaller scales. And I think, there's a really important role for regional grain mills like what Farmer Ground's doing or what Jeff's doing down there in Arizona. But there's also room for baker millers. Working with these small farmers, we're able to sort of take what they are able to produce economically. We don't ask them to grow organic. We don't ask them to grow heirloom varieties because they have limited acreage. As Tor was talking about, the landscape's difficult to grow grains. So whatever it is they can grow and grow successfully and safely, we're willing to work with it. And I think that's really the skill of the baker miller, is to learn how to use the stone mill and create beautiful flour. But then the challenge is to learn to use that flour, to take the grain that's grown nearby and for better or for worse, figure out how to use it and make the best bread or crackers or cookies or whatever you can do with it to support these farmers and what they're trying to do, because they're really taking a lot of the risk in growing grain up here. So eventually that utilitarian model became a lot more refined, and we did that in many ways to be, with stainless steel, so it's a nice clean look, but also a lot of the bakeries wanted to show this off in the front of their shops to say, like, we're going through this extra effort to mill our own flour and try to source it as close as we can and give you the best, most flavorful, nutritious product that we can create. Since we started the company about 7 years ago, we've built 150 mills. There's 7 mills in Vermont now. In Colorado, there's actually 6 different bakeries that have our mills. And this is kind of our ultimate goal with New American Stone Mills, is to build a worldwide community of bakers who use our fresh milled flour in their products, sourcing grain from local farmers to deliver the fullest nutrition and flavor to their customers. There we go.
Quite amazing stories. Thank you for sharing this. I think we're going to open it up now for questions. So please, I know that there's still a big room here, so let's have some questions. I'm sure there are questions. Any questions? So I have a question. I'm going to kick it off then. You know, it's so interesting to look at all of these different models that we saw today. And one of the things, Andrew, especially what you have propagated, especially in Colorado, the bakers that we know with their own mills, is sort of an integration of the value chain. It's a vertical integration, if you will. When we look at the economics of this, I know obviously there's a benefit to the baker, but when we think about the grain chain and the collaborative spirit of the grain chain, how does that impact the grain chain? And anybody really can comment of our speakers to this. What is the economic, you know, is it undermining on one hand the grain chain itself, or is it to everyone's benefit? And I'm not judging it at all. It's just a question that comes up a lot, you know, with the vertical integration.
Yeah, so sure. I wouldn't say that we're undermining it all. I think it's just adding, adding some value for the farmers who are able to work directly with the bakers. But in many ways, it becomes a more specialized product because the baker can tell the story of the connection. The farmer has some value that they're seeing exactly where their grain's going. It's not just disappearing into a truck and going going off to an elevator or a bigger mill. And it also allows for a lot more diversity of what people can produce from milling it themselves, but also farmers can grow different grains that may not be acceptable to a larger commercial mill, and they don't have a use for it. So bakers can sort of feature that by milling it themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Andrew. It's Larry here from New Jersey. How are you?
Good.
Really, really great evening, tonight. And from what relationships we've encountered a little bit here, we have bakers that have your mill, and with the partnerships that we have with some of the local growers, it's spot on, that observation about being able to grow certain grains at the right, scale that are of interest in this, local effort going on here. So it definitely resonates with some of the experiences that we have. And it's an amazing visual, like you said, when you walk into a bakery and you see the mill right there and it's all its presence and how they're using it. What do you build the mills, on demand? I mean, are they, like, what would be the time frame between, order and fulfillment if there was interest in getting a machine like that?
Yeah, we're building them to order. We're constantly trying to keep up as we were. It's about 3 months to build a mill for people.
3 months. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
And Andrew, you have several different sizes of mills. Maybe for the audience, can you give those specs?
Sure, yeah, we have a small mill that's a 26-inch diameter stone, and that one was designed primarily for smaller bakery cafes or bakery restaurants who want to do a little bit of in-house milling. It's a good way to experiment with different varieties of grains. Then there's the 40-inch mill, which is what we use at our bakery, and that's good for Milling all the flour for a small scale bakery, or milling all the whole grain flour for a larger bakery, like Seven Stars Bakery mills all of their whole grain bakery down in Providence, and Selu Bakery, as I mentioned, Jonathan mills all of his whole grain flour and does exclusive whole grain baking off of that mill. And then there's a 48-inch mill, which is a bigger, higher output mill, and that's what Farmer Ground uses, as Greg had mentioned, as their finishing mill.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Other questions?
I have a question. Greg earlier mentioned some about the upkeep for the mills, and I'm wondering about your granite mills. What kind of upkeep do they require?
You want to take that, Greg?
I wasn't sure who that was for, sorry. They make, back in the day, they used to do it with a hand chisel, and now they make pneumatic air chisels. You're basically just re-roughening the stone surface. It's a cutting tool, and you want something that will cut the grain cleanly. And if they get too dull, you can have, it shows up with baking issues with the flour. So it takes a lot of practice for sure to get good at it, and it's super dusty. Stone dust is no fun to breathe in. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's been a challenge as we sell the mills, is to support that for customers. But usually with our mills, I'm able to travel after people have a mill for the first year or 6 months, and show them how to sharpen the stones. And most bakers have been able to rough them up and get them to a state where they're able to make good flour again on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're doing as high a throughput as what Greg's doing there, the nuances really come out and the importance of doing an excellent job of dressing the stones.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
There's a question here in the chat from Kathy, and this is a question related to the space in a small bakery. Maybe Andrew can address that one, because you have installed so many space requirements.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of bakeries, like I said, will put it in a small room with glass on it, so that it'll have its own space just to contain the noise and the dust a little bit, but also so it's viewable to the customers. It doesn't take up too much more room than a mixer. You're sort of a mixing station, so most bakeries will sort of plan around that to add that in.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. I have a question for the gravity table for Greg. So you mentioned that gravity table, but is it by the weight that you are able to remove, smaller seeds or broken seeds that might have disease? You mentioned vomitoxin there with the gravity table. I was just curious.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing machine. It's not weight necessarily, because if it was just weight, you could use an Airstream. You could just blow air across it, and there's plenty of machines that do that. It actually separates things by density. So you could have two particles that are exactly the same size, but one is less dense, or even one that's, a little smaller or a little bigger, but less dense. So it'll get separated. And it uses a very fast vibration on a table that's at an angle. It's actually angled on a couple different planes. And then there's an Airstream going up through the mesh table. So the combination of the vibration and the airflow, it's kind of magical, but things will separate themselves by density. And for falling number, you can look at what's coming off, it separates into a good stream and a bad stream. And you can look at what's coming off, and they look practically identical. But then you weigh them in a you weigh the test weight, they call it, which measures, and you get different test weights. So It's an amazing machine.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah, interesting. Thanks. Any other questions? We talk a lot about flour and milling. We never talk about rolling and flaking. And I do know that Mark Nightingale does have a roller. Mark, could you just explain how that roller works for the flaking that you're able to do? I think you need to unmute yourself. Yeah. There are definitely useful tools for bakers also to have flaked grain or rolled grain. Yeah.
We have a roller mill, stainless steel roller mills, and we can turn them so they turn in unison, or one is an eccentric roll, one will just do a little bit more of an accelerated roll than the other. We add a little bit of steam before we roll the grain, because we want to get a little bit of moisture in that bran. Otherwise, you will peel the wheat or the grain going through, and it'll come out and it'll almost looks like it turns inside out. We want to turn out a kernel of grain that has fractures in the outer layer or in the bran, and that allows the water during cooking process to enter the grain, and so you have a shorter cook time. Otherwise, the grain will come out very smooth and shiny, and you will have the kernels where it takes over 10 minutes to cook. Mm-hmm. And the steam is just an aid in that rolling process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
And Mark, this is Larry again. The speed. How about the speed and the flow of the grain, the various grains when you're flaking? Because what we've noticed in the machine that we use, oats are what we primarily use it for, and it works out great. But when we try to flake like rye or spell, like rye, it'll just, you got to be careful, otherwise it'll just turn to dust.
Exactly.
We use the two rollers, and when they meet, you got to be careful with that. We just noticed the difference of the various grains that we use in the roller and the different observations and considerations that we have to have in order to produce a proper product.
You're exactly right.
Mm.
And you never know what you're going to have. Like for spelt and these heirloom grains, it makes so much difference where the grain is growing. If you get a good grower, you want to stick with him. That'll go through your roller mills, because that is very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thanks for the validation. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
I had a quick question. Maybe it's a question for two people, between Andrew and Jeff. When we were talking about the economics, I thought that was interesting. Jeff's point about the mixing and the heritage grain and trying to come up with ratios that make economic sense, and then contrasting that with what Andrew talked about with that. I think it was the Redeemer bread, Andrew, that you mentioned. And I guess I'm just curious. I mean, from what little I've been able to gather, it seems that when we think of heritage grains and limited yields and some of these relationships, that it does seem difficult on the economic front, but it also seemed like it seemed to be working with what you were presenting with your customer base, with who you were making connections with. I just wonder if there's some dialogue there about where that fits in.
Sure. Yeah. The reason that we don't ask our farmers to grow heritage grains is just because they have a limited amount of land that they're able to grow stuff on. So if they're taking the risk to grow wheat up here, we want them to have the best chance of success and a good yield. That's how we work with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for cleaning that up. And that Redeemer was actually a more modern variety, not a heritage. So I had that. Yeah, clean that up. yeah, that's good. So we keep hearing that. That's a common theme that we hear, which is, I think that's maybe not so apparent, maybe for maybe a new baker or a vertically integrated farmer who wants to become, maybe just figuring that piece out, how much or how little heritage should show up in some of these things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Sean, I was going to say this, Jeff. We just, right before this started, we visited some of our farmers, and I had Keith, who I introduced earlier, with me, and we have irrigated land, and the yield for heritage grains will be 1 to 1.5 tons, so 2,000 to 3,000 pounds per acre. And I'm sorry, we talk pounds, other people talk bushels or hundredweights, but 2,000 to 3,000 pounds per acre. Planting that same acreage with a modern variety, they'll consistently get about 3 tons or up to 6,500 pounds per acre.
Mm-hmm.
However, the heritage grain, there's several things about it. One, it can take 2 less watering. Now, it's irrelevant to you guys that are doing dry land farming, but water is really expensive. So that offsets probably about 1,000 pounds of the decrease in yield. And it takes a lot less input to get a quality grain. So the farmers today, with the spike in gas prices, the problems in Eastern Europe, they're just bemoaning the fact that their fertilizer costs are going to go up and everything for the modern varieties that require a lot of input. And so I would say if the contract for regular wheat was I don't know what's it going for now. Anyway, $8 to $9 a bushel, or however it's measured. You would be about 2.5 times that for the heritage grain, not 3 times, but about 2.5 times. Mm-hmm. And that's the economics of it. But that's all I know. We're willing to pay it because we believe objectively it does perform well in baking, and the flavor is really good. I would go so far as I know that we're virtual, so you can't shoot me for saying this, but you could, I guess, say things in comments. But if I do a yeasted bread, I get a lot of flavor comes through from the wheat, and it tastes good. Now, it really tastes good if I do a natural leaven, but I know that the lower yielding grains do give me a flavor that's not there with the highly refined modern variety. And there's a lot of factors why that could happen. So, but that.
One other big consideration there is just comparing sifted stone ground flours versus whole grain stone ground flours, and that you're getting 100% yield from 100% whole grain flour, and so even though you might be paying more for a grain, you're using 15 to 20% more of that grain, and so it can justify the extra cost.
Yeah, I'm actually going to agree with you that when we mill einkorn or emmer, it's 100%. That stuff's so expensive. I don't want one drop of it, to be wasted. So yes, that's not a sifted flour. So yep, good point. Thank you.
Yeah, no sifting in heritage grains. No sifting in anything, but at least not in heritage grains. So there was one more question, and I think we can wrap it up. But I think this is an important question, and maybe from each of you, your perspective and how you work in your mills, and this testing for toxins is real, as is testing for protein levels and falling numbers and other quality measures. How is it organized, Mark, for you in Heartland Mills, the testing, and which lab do you typically use in Kansas?
We have our own in-house lab, but when asked by consumers, we send it to Great Plains Analytical Lab in Kansas City.
Yeah. And it seems like for Greg, you have now also your own in-house testing. What do you still send out? Do you?
Yeah, there's other quality tests that are way too expensive for us to get a machine. And we also use Great Plains in Missouri, and they're great. But yeah, we only have a few pieces of equipment, but they're not going to really tell us how good of a loaf of bread it's going to make.
So is Tor, for example, this is just an example, how you're working together with the farmers, is Tor sending the sample, or are you requiring, you're working together, but who is sending the sample, especially in an environment like New York where vomitoxins could be a potential issue, or other diseases? Is that constantly?
Yeah, it's pretty standard that the farmer gets it tested first, and then we sign a contract based on that. And I think most larger mills will test for every single parameter when it's received. The truck gets probed, but we can't do that, so we have to rely on trust. But certainly after harvest, I'm collecting samples and test results from all the farmers to try to get a sense of, what do we have, what are the issues, what's available. But that's something we've had to train the farmers on, is it's your responsibility to take a good sample first of all, and then to get it tested yourself.
And I think the sampling part is really important. I keep banging on these guys about, every truck that comes in from the field, get a 5-gallon pail, take a couple of, as it comes out of the truck, take a couple of, smaller containers and throw it in that pail and mix it, and keep, don't just take some random, you got to get a representative sample of the whole thing.
We do the same thing with the farmers that we work with in Vermont. They use the University of Vermont Extension Service, and they're able to send in samples there and give you the vomitoxin numbers, as well as protein and falling number and moisture. Moisture is an important thing for storage for us here.